In this video, we are going to look at how to use while loops to write a program that keeps running until the user wants it to stop. So far, we've looked at programs that run a specific number of times using a for loop. So in a for loop, you have to ask the program to run, for example, 10 times or 15 times, and it runs for that amount of time and then it stops. But sometimes whether a program continues to run is dependent on whether a user has more input or whether the user is done, and that is not predictable. And in that case, we would use something like a while loop. So here's an example. Let's say you want to write a program in which the user enters a number, a set of numbers, a list of numbers, and for each number the program has to tell the user and sort the number into odd or even. Now the program doesn't know how many numbers the user is going to enter, so this would be a good situation to use a while loop. So you would start off this with a message that would say, please enter the number. So please enter a number, and I will tell you if it is odd or even. But then you have to tell the user how to stop the program. That's one of the key things when you're using a while loop, is to figure out what input would stop the program. So in our case, let's say when the user inputs -1, we want the program to stop. So we'll, in our message, say enter -1 to stop. Okay, so that's the first thing. So the user knows what to expect. Then, since you have asked the user to input a number, they're going to input something. You have to capture that in a variable. Let's call that input. So we're going to see in, or we're going to read in, we're going to take in and store in the computer's memory the number that the user has put in, and we're going to call that number input. So now I have to tell the program that input is an integer. Okay, so they'll enter some number. And we'll capture that. Now, once the number has been captured, you need to write code that says to the number, check if the number that was entered by the user is -1, because if it was, the program just stops, it doesn't do anything. But if the number entered was not -1, if it was 8 or 20 or 5 or something like that, then the program's job is to tell the user if it's an odd or even number. So the way you tell the program to check whether the input was -1 is by writing a while loop, which goes like this. You say while input is not equal to -1. This is your way of saying make sure the input is not equal to -1. And then you tell the program what to do if the input is not equal to -1. That's where the curly braces come in. And you say check to see if the input is odd or even. Now, how do you say that? So the way you say that is you take input and you mod it by 2. So you're saying take the input, divide it by 2, and tell me what the remainder is. That's what mod, or this percentage sign, does. And tell me if the remainder is or is not equal to 0. So in this case, you're saying if I take input and mod it by 2 to figure out the remainder, and it turns out the remainder is 0, then in that case, I would like you to see out even. See out even. And then maybe do an end line there. \n. Okay. Well, what if the remainder is not 0? So there is some remainder. Okay, then you would say else, which means otherwise. I want you to, you can copy and paste that piece of code right there, put it here, you see out odd. Okay, so what the program is going to do is, it's going to look at the input, it's going to make sure it's not equal to -1, and then it's going to run it through, is it a 0 remainder number, or is it a number with a remainder? And depending on which one, it's going to output even or odd. Now, in while loops, this is the most common mistake. You tend to forget that this is a loop and that it runs over and over again. So you tend to forget that you have to, once you have read one input and you've done the math on the input, you have to ask the user for the next input inside this loop. If you do not ask the user for another input like this, so if you don't say cout This is still inside the loop because the loop doesn't finish until this curly brace. If you don't say, please enter the next number, and of course they're going to enter something again one more time inside the for loop, you have to see in the number and store it inside input. Now that you've put this inside the loop, every time the loop does the math, it'll ask you for the next number, and it'll take the next number as input, and then it'll go back from this curly brace on line 18, it'll go back to the open curly brace on line 9, and it'll do the check again. So this very first input that you put, it's only used once to start the loop. But once the loop starts, if you don't put this message and the C in again at the end of the loop will not know what the next input is. It will not know what the next number is. So it'll get caught in considering the very first input as the only input, which of course would probably not be -1. So it'll keep running and running and running and running like a dog chasing its tail. So that's the most common problem with while loops. And if your program doesn't run in a while loop, that's probably what's happening. So this is something very important to remember to do. So now if we go ahead and run it, and it's generating an error here, so let's look at what the error might be. And it's saying, okay, so what I forgot to do here is match that curly brace down here. So there's a curly brace there, and then after the else needs its own curly brace. And now let's run it again, and there we are. So I want to enter the number 8. Tells me it's even, 9, odd, 100, even, 96, even, 3, odd, -1, and the program stops. So this is the basic structure of a while loop. A while loop has the condition. It tells the user what to check for. In this case, it's looking for -1, constantly scanning. Is this -1? Is this -1? Is this -1? And if it's not -1, it does whatever is inside the loop. And the curly braces here on line 9 and line 19, everything within that loop keeps running as long as the condition is true. So you can put a lot of different math in here. You can check, for example, if a number is less than a given number or greater than a given number. You can get a number to start at 1,000 and keep adding to it or keep subtracting from it. You can continuously sum up numbers. You can see if something is divisible by 10. All that math would be done inside the while loop here. The other thing to remember is this -1, there's nothing magical about it. This can be any number, any input. And this not equals can also be equal. So you can say something like, while input is not equal to 100, keep doing this. While input is equal to 5, keep doing this. While input is not equal to 3, keep doing this. So you have to think through. This is the part that requires thinking. Think through what condition you want. Think through what you want the program to do when that condition is true. And importantly, think about how to get the next input into the program so it doesn't get caught up in an infinite loop.